We are grateful to be guests of the nations of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe, whose land we are on during this conference. I would like to say Megwetch to Angel, Koya, Melissa H. and Melissa P., Miha, Paulina, and Robert John of the First Nations Two-Spirit Collective, whose long and hard work has brought me here to speak with you today. Megwetch to my lover Sunny, whose tenderness makes my life possible. This is a momentous day. After 23 years, I'm the first Native American plenary speaker. This is a grave responsibility, as I have over 500 years of ignorance and brutality to condense into 30 minutes. I challenge each of you to do the work necessary so I am not the only one. I do not speak for the entire Two-Spirit community, many of whom don't like me. This conference has suffered the loss of the voices of Barbara Cameron Nation Shield, who co-founded the very first Two-Spirit group, Gay American Indians in San Francisco. The voice of Gloria Anzaldúa, who honored her Indios roots, is also now silenced. We have only the groundbreaking books of Paula Gunn Allen to remember her. I speak today in their beloved memory, my comrades, and in those who have been beaten to death or shot in custody and on streets all over this country. We sustain the highest per capita rate of murder, as well as the imprisonment, infant mortality, and the lowest life expectancy by 3 years, including all other races. 1 in 3 Native women is raped at least once in her lifetime. That is, of course, the highest statistics. I'll introduce myself in the Euro-immigrant way because I've decided I don't want to speak as I would to an indigenous audience, because you don't even know what a clan system is, so it's silly. Some of you may be wondering why I chose a Greek name, and so this story will explain perhaps a part of queer history that you may not know. When I joined the Daughters of Bilitis in San Francisco, I was 19, and none of us used our real names. This is because the FBI and police frequently broke into queer groups to get the membership lists, as they certainly still do. We risked losing jobs, apartments, military status, sometimes our lives or our children. Once upon a time, being queer wasn't hip or fun, it was dangerous. I posit to you that despite the veneer of acceptability, this is still very dangerous ground to stand on. We had strong social codes with which we protected ourselves. The woman I eventually loved for 8 years used the name Bobby. My father had given me the nickname Chrystos when I was about 10, and he was learning to read Greek because he didn't trust the translations of Plato and Euripides that he was studying. I miss him very much. He would talk about English being a bear trap language, which is very accurate. So that's the name I used on the membership list and in the Daughters of Bilitis magazine, where my first published poem appeared. Later on, my mother and I had a very angry disagreement, and she was afraid of me ruining the family name with my perversions. And so I continued to use this nickname publicly to appease her bigotry. She didn't die until 2 years ago, so I'm sort of stuck with it. I mention this to explain that my queerness is probably very different from yours. Those of you who are younger than me, I'm 64. I come from a world where cops love to rape butches, and so those of us who were femmes sucked police dick so the butches could escape out the back way. Far from being an imitation of heterosexual life, as we were often accused, we were thorns in the gender role lockstep. Most femmes were able to pass enough to get good jobs, so many butches learned to be good cooks and housekeepers, and in fact, at a certain age level, a butch who could not cook could not get a girlfriend. I was only beaten up once as a young woman by homophobes, and after that I carried a knife, which I recommend. I originally grew my hair out long to protect myself, and a great deal of my life has been lived in fear, in violence, and in poverty. I could not even imagine a lesbian boat cruise, or being paid to be queer, or the idea that I'd be able to hold hands with my lover in public. That 20 years or so of fear still lives on in me. I want those who come to this life in the future to never be afraid. I want us to go out everywhere educating so that no more queers kill themselves. My dead are with me today, and there are too many of them who died too young. How can we help our children to love themselves enough to live? Because in the traditional indigenous way of thinking, all children are our children, and those of us who are queer are responsible for queer children and their survival. This is, I feel, one of our most serious tasks. The phrase vanishing Indians is more than a handy advertising gimmick for the USA government. It is the reality of genocide we face today. We've just finished an inquest in Seattle concerning the murder of an indigenous carver by a Euro-immigrant police officer. I don't use the word white because this is a ridiculous notion created to unify factory workers. So-called white people are more correctly called Euro-immigrants. We joke that the trouble with us is our lax immigration policies. Which allowed criminals, religious fanatics, gold rush maniacs, and so on to join us here. There's not enough time for me to cover all the issues of Indian country, nor begin to educate those of you who believe Columbus discovered the Americas. I again challenge you to educate yourselves about the true history of this place, which is founded on two grievous sins, that is, genocide of Indians for land and enslavement of Africans for labor. This is a shameful, not proud history. My belief is that no one can properly call themselves an activist if they are not grounded thoroughly in this history. I realize that most people who are here have what could be called colonizer minds. I say this as someone who has devoted her life to shedding colonizer attitudes from the age of 12, when I first marched in San Francisco against school segregation and got hit with rocks. The schools there remain largely segregated 52 years later. I insert this so you will understand that social change is a reluctant beast, requiring many lives to edge it forward. And speaking as a person who comes from a tradition of 5 genders, oops, I might not be able to manage this. No place safe to put it. Okay. So I come from a tradition of 5 genders rather than the Christian colonizer binary gender system, which is as abusive as all the other either-or constructs of Euro thought. So, we might want to rethink this idea of the USA. There were no prisons, inaccessible buildings, or homeless people 520 years ago. Perhaps progress is not such a wonderful idea after all, though I remain devoted to hot showers and Beethoven. When people ask me if I hate white people, I say, no, they've actually got some really good ideas. I actually have white friends, as a matter of fact. I even have a straight white man friend. That's quite a miracle. So, I was a dyke when I was 17. And needless to say, my dear mother was not pleased. She's a Catholic, which is probably on the scale of religions right there at the worst. I joke that I am on a 12-step ramp to recover from Catholicism. Anyway, I had to leave home, as many young queer people do, and as also many young queer people do in those circumstances. I was a sex worker for a while, and I don't recommend it. I have been beaten up and incarcerated because I'm a dyke. I myself have never been interested in being accepted by homophobes because, as the English lady said, all women marry beneath themselves. Bigotry is stupidity, which is boring and useless. I don't understand why anyone gives attention to people, for instance, who would put a Hitler mustache on a black man who is our president. Not only is this treason, it is historically incorrect. The only African descent Nazi is in a Kurt Vonnegut fiction, and he was to be a mockery of the whole psychosis. Human beings are the only people who behave so dangerously. I was very suicidal as a young woman, as is often the case with Native youth and especially queer youth. When I joined Gay American Indians, I had a home, and for many years now, I have felt safe only in Two-Spirit territory. We have gatherings, sometimes more than once a year, often international, and in those gatherings, you can actually be an Indian and be queer at the same time. AIDS for men and cancer for women have decimated us. Of the original 80 members of Gay American Indians, only 4 of us are still alive. I am the only one who is sober. I have written about 5 speeches to you and this is the last one. I have no hope, I am sad to say, that my words today will motivate the non-Indians here to take our concerns as your own, to assist us in our thousands of struggles, to protect our homelands, prevent hydroelectric dams flooding our homes, to allow us to be seen as human, not sports mascots, not vanishing, not exotic leaders of a parade or two. I want you to recognize what has been stolen from us and to take your hand out of the pot of loot. Oh my goodness, this is an adult-proof bottle. So I've prayed for guidance about what would be most useful to you of what I've learned in the last 52 years of activism. These are some things you might want to consider. Learn to think logically and critically with an awareness of consequences. As an example, the so-called historic end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell means that we can die for our country, but we still can't love here. My lover had to marry a gay man to escape a dishonorable discharge, so I'm not saying an end to that is bad. I'm saying the Army reports, this is the Army themselves, that 75% of young people are unfit for service due to drug use, criminal records, lack of high school diploma, and obesity. Of course they want gays to serve. You all look lovely in uniforms. But why didn't we bargain for partnership rights as a precursor to joining the military? The people who arrange these things are never up here doing it. There are many myths that we were all raised with: freedom, equality, justice. They don't exist here, and they never have. Don't drink the Kool-Aid of people who don't care about you. Read Indian law if you want to know the real USA. Don't become involved in social justice work to make friends or find lovers or become famous. Don't get lost in the soup of identity politics. Every kind of person is capable of betrayal, theft of ideas, abuse, being an FBI agent, and so on. If you trust someone based only on identity, you'll face very painful lessons, as I have. I don't fight for any of my identities, which are merely the bag of skin I was born in. I'm a warrior for justice, for an end to famine, war, and exploitation. I seek to be a good person who is kind and intelligent and literate. People burn out of social justice work because they don't love themselves enough to draw appropriate boundaries. We have the illusion of self-determination in this place. Actually, our lives are mostly controlled by our races, our economic classes, our talents and mental capacities, our relative able-bodiedness, our genders, the behavior or misbehavior of our parents, the places where we mature, the books we discover, and whether we can serve as a pleasant token in various slots of corporate North America. Corporate and colonizer thinking is based on profit, not people, as they say. In my lifetime, children no longer learn ethics, logic, art, civic responsibility, or history in their schools. When I speak, I meet younger people who think all Indians are dead and tell me so. One must wonder how Miss Manners would instruct me to respond. Or who've never heard of the invasion of Vietnam, the Berlin Wall, the Rosenberg case, Hiroshima, or try to insist that steaks aren't cows, or that reality TV shows are real. I actually argued with a man on the boat. He was an adult even, like 45. And I said to him, trust me, the people who are running the cameras are not eating rats. There is a catering table. Our minds are the most important part of our existence, for this is the place where our spirits reside, where we grow and change and make mistakes. Cherish your mind. Read real books. I'll insert a homework assignment here. Don't worry, I'll confine your reading lists to the 4 that I'm now enjoying. The Turquoise Ledge by Leslie Marmon Silko. Conquest by Andrea Smith. Don't worry, he won't get far on foot with John Callahan. He's actually, for those of you who like only funny books, he's very funny. And Journal of an Ordinary Grief by Mahmoud Darwish, a Palestinian writer who writes most movingly of what it means to lose your homeland to invasion. It occurs to me that none of these writers are queer, which is part of my objection to identity politics. It's too small a place to stand. The mind has no gender, and indeed the mind can take us to our ancestors as well as our future together. Don't chain yourself up inside any label. Your spirit knows exactly where to go. Our difficulty is that we are assaulted constantly by noise and trivia. Trivia is only good for crossword puzzles. I'm a fanatic New York Timeser. Silence, away from machines, is the sacred place. The earth without cement is the holy place. At the risk of never being asked to speak here again, I'll say everything you need to learn can be found for free in close observation. In close observation of your relationships with the earth, with each other, and with yourselves. The corporate world encourages us to be greedy, to have 100 pairs of shoes, to fight for scraps, to be unethical, to buy a car instead of walking, to pay and pay to the company store. The memory of a beloved face is so much more important than the latest electronic gizmo. Colonizer oppression encourages all of us to see life as a pie with only so much to go around. We are pushed to fight for a bigger piece of the pie, to be, as they say, somebody. But we are born with the grace of spirits as someone. We don't need to wear a dress to be a woman. Dresses are cultural confetti. There is no pie. There is just us, the animals, the birds, our poor, abused earth. We have a unique opportunity in this time and place to become humans who do no harm. This is the core of indigenous belief: to love and nurture, to laugh about difference instead of killing it, to be grateful for our lives, which can be so beautiful if we stop behaving in violent, ugly ways. Nowhere else on earth has this many languages, cultures, religions, possibilities of transcendence. The best leaders are the ones who listen to what everyone wants, or needs, actually, because want is another thing altogether. The most helpful person has no agenda, no list, no need to be superior to others. I encourage you to find ways to meet and talk outside of the trappings of the Hilton, which I may say has truly terrible chandeliers. But no bed bugs, I checked. Or if you are going to use the Hilton, only do so if they will back partnership rights as a corporation. Just because someone takes your money doesn't mean you're going to get a ride. Occurs to me that you may not have heard someone speak in this way. There's no point A to B. This is Indian country. It has no fences. It doesn't judge people by their bank accounts, but by how much they do for their community. I would suggest to you that Indian country has many ideas about how to behave correctly. I ask you to consider indigenous leadership rather than tokenism. Oh, let me see. I'll do a little bit more. I don't know what time it is. No watch, don't care. Because actually reducing the sacred concept of time to little dots is rather insulting to time, wouldn't you say? So there's a few burning issues that I have to speak about. One is there's a trend to call us British, which was begun by Will Roscoe, who is not indigenous, but who wrote a book about us. British is a corruption of a French word that means Persian slave boy. So as none of us are Persian, or at least not as far as I know, there's no mixed blood Persians, that's a very incorrect term, so please do not use the term British. The generally preferred term is two spirits, and this leads me to tell you something about somewhat of what two-spiritness means. My dear friend Wesley Thomas, who's Danae, and you should have him come next year because he has slides even, which you would enjoy. In the Danae, or as you would know, Navajo creation myth, two-spirit people are very important figures. So in the beginning of the world, the men were over there arguing and farting around and doing what men do, you know, being mad because of whatever. And the women were on the other side, mad because the men were mad or not because the men were mad. You know how people are, right? Just crabby all the time. And so creation decided that in order for men and women to be able to get along, they needed two-spirit people to negotiate. So this is one of the many traditional roles we had in society, which was negotiating between arguing men and women. Our societies were much more peaceful as a result than yours. We had a much lower divorce rate. Of course, we didn't even have what you would call marriage. I myself want all the rights that heterosexuals have, but I don't want to wear a white dress. I think that it's been a long, long time since I was a virgin, and it would be a little bit ridiculous. So I encourage you to get Wesley to come here next year. The creation story is very beautiful. As I said, he has slides. He has all this wonderful information about gender. And one of the most important things I've learned from him is that in Diné culture, gender and sexuality are not combined. In the English language, those two things are sort of meshed into one. So in the Diné way of being, sexuality is pretty much not really talked about. It's a private matter that's not really of interest to the general public. There are in the history of this country many two-spirited people, several Navajo people that we know, because they were very fortunate. They didn't have any gold, so they didn't get white contact until quite late in the mix. So they still speak their language. One of the things that I hope that you will explore in terms of looking at the history, because I've had people be quite upset with me for being so hostile to Christianity. And that hostility comes not only from my own life, but from what happened to my father in boarding school. So you probably don't know that all of the indigenous nations in this country were sort of divided up in a lottery, and different religions took on different tribes and established so-called boarding schools in those tribes. Sometimes the boarding schools were in Pennsylvania, quite far away, and Indian children were taken as young as the age of 1 to these boarding schools and raised to be white people. They were forbidden to speak their languages, which is why so many indigenous people now are not able to speak our languages, because our parents were forbidden to speak them. And there was terrible deaths of children, starvation, rape. As you know, particularly Catholic priests have a hard time keeping it in their pants. But so the history of boarding schools is a very important part of the history of this country, and the difficulty of being friendly towards Christians. Dakota, Lakota, and Menominee people, we all got the Catholics. And I think our creation stories are more interesting than Adam and Eve, quite frankly. There's more characters, for one thing. Okay, so we had a lot of jobs. Naming children was one of those jobs. As I said, negotiating between arguing people. A lot of times we were the spiritual leaders of our tribe. There's a woman in the Northwest who, Chief Sarah, who was a two-spirit woman who had 4 wives. She must have been a good hunter. And that's a lot of mouths to feed. And so I'd also like to mention to you that the treasurer of AIM, the American Indian Movement, for many years was Douglas Durham, who was an FBI agent. And he's a great deal of the reason why the American Indian Movement fell apart, although CONTELPRO helped a lot also. So I'm not pointing figures, I'm just saying be aware. Never assume that the FBI is not interested in what you're doing. They have so many agents with nothing to do. So I'm going to close. I tell you, this purse. lost the book. Oh well. I was going to read you a poem, and it's gone. I don't suppose anybody has a copy of In Her I Am. No. You have a copy of In Her I Am? I'm so grateful to you. What is your name? Song. I'm so grateful to you because let's see, now I have to find it. This is the first ever time that a native language appeared in an erotic poem. And at the time that I made this book, I was terrified of what Indian people were going to do to me about this book. And it's actually quite funny, you know. There's guys that read it and then they hide it, you know, and they don't want you to know that they're reading it because they're trying to find out how to make women like them. And the straight ladies read it, and you know, it's quite interesting how it's gone across Indian country and actually opened up a place for indigenous writers to have heterosexual erotica, which I think is really wonderful because it didn't exist before. So I'm going to say a couple of more things and then I'll read you the poem. So I believe this organization could only be improved by including Two-Spirit people in a much broader way than now exists, like on the board or with a paid position. The first place to begin change is always, of course, with ourselves, and giving up colonizer thinking is very, very hard work. There's a number of books that address this. I think Patricia Smith, that might be the right name, wrote an amazing book about it. She's not an American writer, so I might be wrong about the name. So I'm going to read you this poem, and for those of you who speak Lakota, please excuse my lousy pronunciation because it's not my language. This is called Song for a Lakota Woman. As we came around the curve of a bluff, the lake opened on spread wings of a white egret. You turned to me with tiny wildflowers in your hands, murmuring softly, "Uya manamani on petukin lila washte." All my feathers shone in your voice. Rushing through leaves growing from fiery earth, we came to a place where we knew our mouths would meet. Hurrying to an anonymous room, we showered and plunged into bed. Your soft arms shining brown over me, turning me wild in your hands, a flying lake you drank, flowers in your eyes as I shouted too loudly, coming open. And unfortunately, I still can't tell you her name, because that's the way things go. So, Megwach, gracias, merci. Thank you for wandering with me over so many terrains. May you find your way to that greatest of all wisdoms, as the Talmud says, kindness.